What's going on, Internet? IG here once again. Today we're going to be looking at the official Ubuntu Gnome Edition. Basically, this is the distribution that would have been otherwise called Ubuntu. So with Ubuntu 13.10 and it being based, the Unity desktop being based anyway on GNOME or GNOME 3.8, I figured it might be worth having a look at what the official Ubuntu Gnome Edition or GNOME Edition looks like nowadays, because it is vanilla GNOME 3.8. So Ubuntu Gnome Edition 13.10 came out with all of the other Ubuntu derivatives that I have already checked out, so there will be links down below and also lots of annotations down here if you haven't already checked those reviews out. Definitely worth doing because this is actually the first time that I've had a look at all of the derivatives. But the Ubuntu Gnome Edition is all about bringing the vanilla GNOME desktop to Ubuntu so they give users a nice base on which they can build their GNOME experience. So let's have a look at what the GNOME team have been up to and how it pans out in this distribution. So this is Ubuntu Gnome Edition 13.10, the Saucy Salamander. So first up, I'm going to say that I'm logged into the GNOME Classic mode, and now GNOME Classic is basically a more up-to-date version of what the GNOME project was originally doing with the GNOME 2.x series. You've got the two panels, one at the top, one at the bottom, with applications and places menu running along the top. Now, one thing that I will say is that since GNOME Shell came out, and with the all of the fancy touchscreen effects that GNOME Shell provided, there was quite a number of users that were very disgruntled with it all, and they wanted to have their traditional desktop paradigm back. And GNOME Classic was kind of put as a half-hearted sort of side issue to the GNOME Shell release. Most of the development was put into the GNOME Shell desktop environment, and the GNOME Classic was just kind of left as a abandoned wannabe kind of idea. Well, GNOME Classic, I'm proud to say, is actually much better, and that includes GNOME 3.8. First of all, the applications menu is obviously still relatively Spartan, but it makes sense, at least much more sense than what the GNOME Shell one does to the traditional desktop user paradigm. Places is fairly stock standard, but the applications menu works quite well. Not only that, they also give you then the activities overview that is known and common to GNOME Shell. So you can see here you've got your different desktop environments, you can still type to search, and this is all launched still by using the Meta key, or the Windows key on your keyboard. So for example, if I search for contacts, you can see I've got my options here in the search results. So it's very much like having the best of both worlds of both GNOME Classic and GNOME Shell, and I believe this is what the GNOME team should have done to begin with when they released GNOME Shell. They should have been releasing this one as the default and GNOME Shell as the option if you wanted to use a more touchscreen oriented desktop. Now, of course, many of GNOME Shell and GNOME Classic's functions are or can be navigated via the keyboard and mouse, so it's not a touchscreen exclusive experience, but GNOME Shell definitely does make more sense on a touchscreen than it does on a traditional desktop computer, especially one with high screen resolution. However, they've ironed most of those issues out with updating GNOME Classic, so it makes it a little bit easier for new users to jump on board with this. And also it keeps a lot of us Linux users happy along the way. You can add applets and GNOME Shell extensions here as well to expand the functionality of the desktop, but by default it's a fairly Spartan setup with only the bare essentials there, and the same can be said for applications. Really, they only bundle the applications that the GNOME Shell provide, or that the GNOME desktop environment provide by default, as well as LibreOffice and Shotwell and Firefox for web browsing. It's not a bad setup, but it's pretty foundational and it's pretty easy to add new applications using the Ubuntu Software Center, just like all the other derivatives that I've talked about in this series. Installation was a breeze and it's very quick and easy to set up, and performance overall is okay. Unfortunately, there's a VirtualBox bug where the graphics rendering and the graphical effects of the GNOME desktop environment don't seem to run as smoothly as they do on native hardware. So if you see this choppy performance in this video recording, it's due to the fact that unfortunately GNOME Shell is a little bit boggy inside VirtualBox. On native hardware it's not a problem, but unfortunately inside VirtualBox it can be a bit of an issue. As far as things specific to the Ubuntu Gnome Edition, they've included some nice artwork, some nice branding, and some nice boot screens to sort of signify the fact that they are a part of the official Ubuntu family. But apart from that, they don't really do too much customizing this GNOME desktop much at all. Now, this is part of their vision, obviously, to provide a vanilla GNOME experience for the Ubuntu desktop. And I think for that, they achieve their goal, but it probably would be nice to see a little bit of differentiation, considering distributions like OpenSUSE and Fedora also package very vanilla versions of the GNOME desktop. And now it also is worth mentioning that GNOME 3.10 has since come out, and that also brings a whole bunch of features to the table. So GNOME 3.8 is a little bit old, but you can add PPAs that can backport GNOME 3.10 to Ubuntu 13.10. Now it also is worth mentioning that the GNOME shell in 3.8 has introduced some new search features. Type one letter and you'll get results not only with applications but also with any documents or files that you've recently used. So it kind of expands the functionality of the keyboard launching, which is cool stuff, and it just makes for a smoother desktop experience. Really, there's not too much else to say about the Ubuntu Gnome Edition. It doesn't have too many new features apart from the improvements with the GNOME Classic, and really it's just the very stock standard GNOME 3.x series. It would be nice to see a little bit of differentiation, and also I have noticed a few bugs, but they may be specific to VirtualBox like I mentioned. It's only early days for this distribution, so I'll be keen to see where this distro goes in the future. But if you're looking for an Ubuntu-based distribution that gives you GNOME shell that you can build and customize to the way you want, then definitely give the Ubuntu Gnome Edition 13.10 a look. So what do you guys think of the official GNOME remix of Ubuntu? I know it's a little bit disappointing that the name can't be Ubuntu or GNOME Ubuntu or I don't know. But apparently they didn't want to get mixed up with a Google branded version of Ubuntu that was like some years ago. So I don't know. So it's a very nice distribution. Can I recommend it to a new user? Well, maybe, maybe not, depending on how quickly they can adjust their desktop paradigm, because of course it is one of those next-gen desktops, so it's not exactly a traditional, task panel, icons, window manager type deal. But anyway, there are so many extensions out there nowadays that you can really customize the GNOME Edition or GNOME 3.8 in general to whatever you like. So let me know in the comments below if you would like me to have a look at Ubuntu Studio 13.10, because that's one I've never reviewed either, and I shall catch you all in the very near future. Thank you for watching and subscribing, commenting and liking and all of that fun stuff. Share these videos around if you find them helpful, and I will catch you all in the very near future. Peace out, ladies and gentlemen.